जी ख़वातीन और हज़रात, अस्सलाम वालेकुम। मैं हूं आपका होस्ट ऑन नकवी और हम आपकी खिदमत में हाजिर हैं उम्मीद के एक और एपिसोड के साथ। और हम यकीन करते हैं कि हमारे प्रोग्राम आपको पसंद आ रहे होंगे और अपनी आरा से हमें ज़रूर आगाह कीजिएगा। हमारा ईमेल एड्रेस आप अपनी स्क्रीन पर देख रहे होंगे। नाज़रीन, दुनिया में लाखों लोग ये ख्वाहिश रखते हैं कि वो किसी न किसी तरह यूनाइटेड स्टेट्स ऑफ अमेरिका की सरजमीन तक पहुँच सकें, और इस ख्वाहिश की जुस्तजू में वो किसी भी कुर्बानी से दरेग नहीं करते। चाहे वालिदैन से जुदाई हो या बच्चों से दूरी हो, अपना देश को छोड़ना पड़े या यारों और प्यारों से बिछड़ने की मजबूरी हो। कभी आपने सोचा है कि क्या वो ऐसी क्या कशिश है जिसकी वजह से लाखों इंसान इस सरजमीन पर आना चाहते हैं? इस कशिश का नाम अमेरिकन ड्रीम है। और नाज़रीन, अमेरिकन ड्रीम क्या है? अमेरिकन ड्रीम बेसिकली वो आज़ादी है जिसका ख्वाब लाखों लोग अपनी आंखों में सजाए दुनिया के मुख्तलिफ मुल्कों में बैठे हुए हैं। और इसी अमेरिकन ड्रीम को कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन ऑफ यूनाइटेड स्टेट कुछ इस तरह बयान करता है दैट all men are created equal with unchangeable rights for liberty, life and pursuit of happiness. And this is what make this country the land of opportunity. And anybody, and literally anybody, can achieve success or an upward social mobility, but only through hard work. Let me introduce my very special guest today, and she's a 2012 Hofstra University Law School graduate. She's holding 2 degrees, and she's working with the Central American Refuge Center, helping thousands of people. Very professional and very presentable, Ms. Elise Demas.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much, Elise, for taking time out of your very busy schedule. Thanks for being on the show.
It's my pleasure.
So can you tell me that 8 states, 4 countries, 2 degrees, a lot of volunteer work with UN, and presently working with a non-profit. How all you manage that in this young age?
In a short amount of time. Because I, from a very young age, was the kind of person who didn't go out on Friday nights, didn't go out on Saturdays, stayed home, studied, because I knew that in the end that was going to be the most beneficial for me. And so I tried to suck as much out of every moment as I could. In breaks during school, between semesters, I would travel abroad, either doing volunteer work or living. I took a gap year after I graduated from college and before going on to law school to continue with my volunteer work and living abroad.
So that was that means you had a very calculated and focused life right from your school age.
I have.
That's very nice to know. That'll be a lovely surprise to my audience when I'll tell them that you've been to Indian part of Punjab and you work for a small school. What was that?
Well, for a long time, I'd had a desire to go and see India. I remember seeing picture books as a child and being fascinated by the images of the Taj Mahal, and it just seemed like this kind of fantasy land to me. And so when I was in college, I had many friends who were Punjabi, and one of them, his family had a school in somewhere between a town and a pind in Punjab. And so I was looking for the opportunity to volunteer and continue working, but obviously abroad. And they offered me the opportunity to go and teach at this school. So.
Wonderful. So that means it looks like that you're blended well in the very rich Punjabi culture, and like you were truly like a Balle Balle Punjabi Muttiar running around like a Bollywood flick in the Indian Punjab.
With my salwar kameez, I'm a Punjabi goody at heart.
Great.
Completely.
So if I ask you what was the biggest fascination of Punjab, was it that food? Was that the atmosphere? What was that?
I think it was the culture. Anybody who knows Punjabis knows how remarkably warm the Punjabi people are. They accept you with open arms no matter where you're from. It's this incredibly warm, open, engaging, happy culture. Of course, the food, I can't complain. I came back 15 pounds heavier and my right hand was completely yellow from all the haldi.
Makki ki roti and saag, sarson ka saag.
And chavla and gosh, everything.
Wonderful. So you actually loved the culture, the food and the people?
And the people.
Wonderful. Lisa, a little bit towards your profession. As far as we all know, being immigrants, when we are supposed to go to different immigration training offices, and generally the culture is that when you get the appointment, when you go, they put a timepiece on the table, which is like $100 an hour kind of a thing, and your time is up, you go. So in that atmosphere, how you are working as with a non-profit, helping people?
Well, I think there are two very different types of attorneys. There are attorneys who have firms and who are private attorneys, and it's a business for them. They, through no fault of their own, have to make money. You know, they, in order to be able to pay their bills, to pay their rent, to be able to continue the business, they have to put that timepiece on the table and say, okay, I give you 15 minutes, go ahead and speak. I'm blessed to work for a nonprofit where the perspective is very different. I would say the majority of our funding is not received from client fees, but if not from outside agencies, from outside donors that make it possible for us to be that way with clients, to be able to say the money is the last thing that we're worried about. Our focus, our mission is on you. It's the person who's sitting across the desk and not the money in your pocket.
Yeah,
So,
I understand what you're saying, but you know, it is very difficult for me to digest that where the doctors and lawyers are the money makers in this country. You're not doing any private practice.
none.
So, I mean, it doesn't fit in my mind. And being an immigration attorney in United States, you're helping people. Is there any background to that for which you want to give back to the community?
I think my focus has always been on service to the community. From the time that I was old enough to travel abroad, the communities I was working with were the most underprivileged, the most marginalized, the poorest. And my focus on working with them wasn't, well, let me see how much money I can make, but it was here people who need help and whose lives I can make better and who don't have the money to do it on their own.
Yeah, I got that part. But in United States, we all know that you have to spend a lot of money when you are going for higher degrees. So you did 2 degrees and you are masters in law from the law school. So how, we have seen that there's a lot of the student debt they have to pay back. So how you are managing that whole thing with?
I was lucky enough to not only not have to pay to go to law school, but I actually got paid by the university.
Wow.
I walked out with a free degree and they actually gave me $15,000 for going to the university, which is why I made the decision to go to Hofstra. It's a wonderful university, yes, but I knew that it would make it possible for me to walk out of law school with essentially no debt and be able to take a lower paying job that I really, really love.
So actually you were among those lucky one who managed to get the scholarship for a free degree. And now you want to pay back to the community?
In a sense, I think that's what I went to law school for, and I feel blessed to have the opportunity to do it.
Okay, can you tell us about the nonprofit you're working, the Central American Refuge Center, why you chose that, and what services are you providing to the communities?
Absolutely. I chose the Central American Refugee Center for a number of reasons. One, it's an organization that has 30 years of really intense dedication to the immigrant community. One of the great things about the Central American Refugee Center, we call it CARESN, is that it's been able to adapt to the times. With many nonprofits, their roots, their origins are in a particular cause, a particular movement, and then after that movement or cause is over, you've achieved what you want to achieve, they stagnate. They don't know where to go from there. And CARESN is very different. Our roots were in helping Central American refugees in the 1980s, but as that cause kind of slowed down, we were able to adapt and see other needs within the immigrant community and adapt to them and provide those services to meet the needs of the community that we were working with.
But as the name reflects, it looks like that's only for the Central American immigrants only, or it is open to all?
Absolutely not. It's a question that I get at least twice a week. Okay, it says Central American.
Yeah.
I'm from Pakistan. Can you help me?
Yeah.
Absolutely. I have clients all over Latin America, of course. I have clients from Turkey. I have clients from Pakistan, India, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh. I have European clients. So absolutely, even though the name says Central American, we help anybody and everybody.
Great. That's wonderful, because most of our audience are from Asia, Southeast Asia, and somehow there is a fear to even go to an attorney, and especially an immigration attorney, because that's like a big thing, and people are afraid because they knew that there's going to be charged with a lot of money. And it's a great thing through this program. Actually, we can refer your organization, and we hope that after seeing this program, a lot of people will come and get the help from Central American Refuge Center.
I would be happy to be able to speak Punjabi instead of Spanish for a change.
So coming back to the Punjab part, because I know my audience will be much interested in that aspect as well. Was there any Bollywood kind of a lost love in a Punjabi Sardar Munda or something like that?
Bilkul. Yes, that's not what brought me to Punjab, but that's what kept me in Punjab. There was a Sardar.
There was somebody.
There was a Sardar. Yes, it was very star-crossed, and it kept me in Punjab. We'll
Wonderful.
say that.
But a girl from been in so many countries, living like in 8 states, and all the way going to Punjab, living in a small village, I mean, that's very difficult to apprehend. How you manage that? I mean, the troubles, the load shedding, the mosquitoes, and there are so many, they are the realities. I'm not trying to, what I'm trying to ask you is that what was that motivation which helped you kept fighting all these odds?
First of all, I really loved India. I got there, and of course, coming from the West and going to India, having never experienced that culture, it was a huge change. Obviously, the culture itself is very different, the way of life is very different, and it was a huge adjustment. But the work that I was doing to me was really valuable, and I think more than anything, I just fell in love with India. More specifically, Punjab.
Punjab.
I mean, India itself.
So you fell in love with Punjab.
Yeah, India's beautiful, but it's Punjab. Punjab has my heart.
Oh, wonderful. That's really very touching for me, for all our clients, audience to know that. So, Elise, coming back to the immigration reforms bill, as we know that there's a lot of in media these days that the immigration bill was supported by the Democrats and it was passed by the Senate, but it has an uncertain future in the House of Republicans are not pretty much. So what do you see? You see it happening?
I do see it happening. I think that it's not going to be as immediate as we were hoping last year. Obviously, when it passed the Senate, we were all very excited, but we knew that there was going to be a battle in the House, as there was, because as you said, it's Republican-controlled, and John Boehner and his stauncher Republican allies have taken a very strong stance against it. They've said that in addition to just generally being against immigration reform or as comprehensive an immigration reform as the Democrats would like, they also don't want to give that political victory to Obama. They don't want immigration reform to be something that passes while Obama is in office. They don't want it to be Obama's program.
Okay.
So there's this thought that maybe after Obama is out of office, there might be more movement.
Okay.
But I do think that it's something that eventually...
It can happen.
It will. It has to happen.
It has to happen.
I think if we're going back to the political angle, the Republicans have realized that without the immigrant vote, you lose elections. It's absolutely...
They already lost two.
Absolutely. It's absolutely fundamental. And they know that if they keep denying immigration reform and then ultimately something that passes through the political will of the Democrats, then they're viewed as the anti-immigrant party and they will continue to lose elections.
Okay. Lisa, such an interesting conversation with you, for me, for audience as well, but we have to take a short break. So, ladies and gentlemen, we'll go on a short break. Stay tuned. Don't go away, because when we come back, we'll ask what's happening next in the immigration reforms bill in Senate. जी नाज़रीन, वेलकम बैक। और इस वक्त हम बात कर रहे हैं एलिस से, जो कि सेंट्रल अमेरिकन रिफ्यूज सेंटर्स। ओके। जी नाज़रीन, वेलकम बैक फ्रॉम द ब्रेक। और इस वक्त बहुत ही इंटरेस्टिंग गुफ्तगू हमारी हो रही है मिस एलिस, जो कि रिप्रेजेंट कर रही हैं सेंट्रल अमेरिकन रिफ्यूज सेंटर को, और उनसे हम इमिग्रेशन पे बात कर रहे हैं, जो कि एक बहुत ही सीरियस इशू है पाकिस्तानी कम्युनिटी के लिए और साउथ एशिया के रहने वाले बाकी लोगों के लिए। सो एलिस, बैक फ्रॉम ब्रेक। सो recently we heard that President Obama directed the Department of Homeland Secretary Jay Johnson to be more humane in deportations. So how do you see about that? What relief that can bring in for the communities?
To be honest with you, I'm not sure where that will lead. What I can say is that I think Obama has gotten this title as the king of deportations.
Yeah, he was known as, he earned the nickname of the deportator in chief.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if he earned it. I think he was given it.
Okay.
He was given it. As a staunch Obama supporter, I think he was given it.
Okay.
But what has happened is the Republicans in particular, or anybody who is against Obama, likes to point out, well, here he says he's for immigration reform, but he has the highest deportation rate.
Yeah, 2 million immigrants, they were deported under his administration.
This is hypocrisy, they say. Well, the fact is that it's not as simple as that. It's not that every deportation order that is being given, every person that's being deported, Obama is personally signing the deportation order. I think there's this balance between enforcing the laws of the United States, which he as president has that mandate, and doing it fairly and humanely. And I think that that's the balance he's trying to strike. Go ahead.
But you think that as he's claiming that he's the biggest supporter to fix this broken immigration system, is he really serious to do that? And at the same time, the deportations are happening.
Absolutely, I think he is. I think proof of that is last year, 2012 and 2013. Immigration reform is not going to pass. He doesn't have this wonderful magic wand that he can wave to all of a sudden grant immigration reform and stop deportations. But what he did do was enact two really crucial executive orders that showed that he is pro-immigrant and family unity, which is a core principle under immigration law. And one of those was the Deferred Action, which is the program that he put in place for young students or children that arrived at a young age. And also last year, he implemented a program by which the husbands and wives of U.S. citizens who have been in the United States undocumented are able to or have a better chance of staying together. So
So Lisa, we recently learned that few of the states, probably Florida, they're given the right to the immigrant kids who their parents are not legal, but they have given the right to have driving license, or they can have the admission in schools and colleges. For our Pakistani community living in New York, you see something happening here as well?
Actually, absolutely. It's a federal law.
So it's implemented in New York too?
It's implemented across the country. It's called DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. And essentially, a person who entered the United States prior to turning 16, who entered the United States before June 15th, 2007, and who is enrolled in or has graduated from some educational program, in addition to a few other lighter requirements, is eligible to receive work authorization, to have a social security number, which then makes it able
to work.
To work, and then they can go on to college and apply for scholarships.
Or they can get the scholarships,
absolutely.
They can get the grants.
Driver's licenses. I mean, it's essentially, it's granting them status, understanding that a child who's brought here at the age of 5 has no free will. They didn't do it because they wanted to. They did it because they were with their parents, and their parents were the ones that brought them here. And it's recognizing that you can't punish children for something they didn't do.
Yeah, they didn't do that. Another grave issue with especially Southeast Asians living in America and Pakistanis, that the status of permanent status, TPS, was given to Haitian people. We had a war going on in our country, and we have like the massive earthquake in 2005, and Pakistanis were thinking that the president is going to will award that status to the Pakistanis living here. So you think so that because of whatever is happening in our country can help given that status to Pakistanis?
Temporary protected status, TPS, is something that's granted in different countries where there's been some sort of crisis. Like you said, in Haiti after the earthquake, in El Salvador, they were granted temporary protected status back in 2001, Honduras in 1998 because of a hurricane. So it's something that's granted discretionally. And it's granted
probably, sorry, cutting you, probably given to Syrians as well because of the whatever is going on in Syria.
We can hope, but it's something that's granted immediately essentially after the crisis.
Okay.
In terms of whether or not or why TPS hasn't been granted to Pakistanis, I couldn't tell you. My only hope would be that if there's
You're hoping that
of course.
It could happen.
Of course. If there are people here that cannot return to their countries, absolutely they should be granted TPS because they should be able to remain here and work authorized and have legal status in this country. And if that applies to Pakistan, 100% support it.
Okay. Lisa, one of another major issue which I see every day that the kids who are born here, who are US citizens, some are on permanent residents, they apply for their spouses in Pakistan for fiancé visa in order to get their fiancés quicker than if they apply for immigrant visa. So would you like to give any advice to them? Because I see all those people who are coming on fiancé visa, they have a lot of problems if they have to go back. So what is your best recommendation in that regard?
There are two very different processes. With a fiancé visa, you have to come to the United States and then marry.
But that is quicker.
Of course, if it's granted.
That's quick, yeah.
If it's granted, it's quicker, of course. And you have to marry.
But the IV visa process is more, time-taking. That's why they go for fiancé visa. But then they're kind of stuck. They cannot go back if there's any unforeseen happening.
Sure. Well, what happens with the fiancé visa? You enter, and then you have to be married to your husband or wife within a very short amount of time. So if something happens, let's say the marriage is called off, you decide this boy's not for me, I don't like this girl's family, then all of a sudden you're stuck in that position where I'm here, and there's nothing I can do. So in that case, it's a little more tenuous.
Okay.
It would be more secure for the couple to just apply for the immigrant visa, because then the marriage is already something solid. Of course, it's going to take longer, but there's less risk of something going awry in that short
Yeah.
amount of time you have to get married.
All the major issues are coming into my mind right now. I want to make the maximum use of this time. Another thing which we see around us, especially I've seen it in the Pakistani community or Asian community, that their parents married them to their cousins and families back home, and when the spouses, they come here, somehow they don't, manage to live together. But the worst case scenario is that the person who was called here has been sent back by the in-laws. So is there anything that those people can fight against that? I mean, because if the girl doesn't like the boy, they kick them back to their country, which is kind of unfair.
Sure. Well, what happens is, if, let's say, a girl comes in, she's married in Pakistan, and she enters, and she's now here to live with her husband and her husband's family.
Yeah.
And it's a disaster. Boy and girl don't get along. Boy's family can't stand girl. It's a mess. They get divorced or something happens, and they want to send her back to Pakistan. If the marriage is entered into in good faith, if it was always the girl's intention, the boy's intention, to remain together as a couple, things just didn't happen, then the girl still has the opportunity to remain here. It's not that all of a sudden she loses her legal status.
She can come to your center and ask for help?
I would be more than happy to tell her exactly what she would need to do.
Okay, great. So because that's another lack of knowledge, or probably they were not been given the opportunity to go and know what they can do.
Sure.
If you are not suitable for the girl and the boy, go back.
And that's a huge problem, I think, within not the legal system, but the legal service system. Attorneys, to go to an attorney is so expensive that
that's another thing.
People, instead of going to attorneys, they talk to their cousin, they talk to the person on the street, they talk to the person that they buy their coffee from. What do you know about the situation? And they end up getting misinformation, and then that girl who'd be completely eligible to remain in the United States she goes back to Pakistan because she thinks that's the only option she has, which is, I think, another reason that working at Grayson for me is so important, because through our work, through what we do, we get quality, free, generally speaking, legal information into the community, which, regardless of whether or not you have an immigration case with us, we're always happy to give advice, to explain to you what your options are.
Please, the purpose of requesting you on the show is that most of our community doesn't know any organization like your organization, or probably they are not much out there. And is there any need to have more organizations like that, or to be more public, so people should know that? I think so. People know very little about organizations like you.
I think that's true. First of all, the number of private attorneys far outweigh the number of nonprofits, and
there are less people like you.
There are very few of us. There are few of us. No, and also because nonprofits provide lower cost legal services, we are extremely busy. Our doors are always open, and there's always a flood of people, and then also what happens is, like you identified, people see Central American Refugee Center and say,
that's another thing. They see the sign and say, no, that's not for us.
That's not for us, right? Where's the South Asian? Where's the Desi organization, right? It doesn't exist, and I think it's important for people to realize organizations can't discriminate. If an organization says we're a Haitian organization, they can't discriminate against a person from Southeast Asia.
You cannot turn down anybody.
Absolutely not.
You're from Pakistan. Sorry.
No, it might not be the community they generally are geared towards, but it's against the law, frankly, to turn away anybody based on their national origin. So my advice would be, even if the sign over the door doesn't say Pakistani, Indian, South Asian, ask and see if you can be helped, because my bet is that you can.
So don't you think that, I don't know what was the background of giving this name to this organization. Probably it was created only for Central American immigrants, and now you're helping everybody. Don't you think that names should be free of regional... Please don't mind. I mean, came into my mind, just popped up. And
just the refugee center, right?
Yeah, just the refugee center, or free help to all.
I think the thing is that it's a brand. Grayson has 30 years of a wonderful reputation.
Great.
And if we all of a sudden dropped the Central American, then people say, well...
You're recognized from that name.
People know. People say, you need help, go to Kuraisen. I hear it all the time. Somebody told me, you have a question, go talk to Kuraisen. They'll be able to help you. And it's the name of the organization. I've discussed with you. We don't advertise.
That's another thing I was asking you. That, I mean, isn't it a good idea that you can put ads, or I don't know if you can do that, to make more people aware of what you are doing? Because I know that in our community, nobody actually knows about any organization which is helping free of cost, which is a great thing you guys are doing.
It's true. I think I'm not the one in charge of our publicity. I think if I were, it might be a little different. But the thing is, the reason we have no advertising, we really don't have a website, we have very minimal presence on social media, is because we've been around for 30 years through word of mouth, because people say, they do a really good job. They care about the community, and the work they do speaks for itself. And so we've never had to have the big neon sign or the billboard or the flashy website to remain in existence, because we've done it just based on the work that we do.
Yeah. So let me just go to the structure. You have two offices, one in Suffolk and one in Nassau. And how you are managing your funds, and you are getting some grants from the government? How you are running day-to-day affairs?
Yeah, absolutely. For certain immigration processes, we do charge. It's still a law office, but we charge less than what a private attorney would charge.
We can even imagine outside.
Yeah, I hear all the time, clients will come in and they'll ask, well, what does this cost? And I'll give them the price, and they'll say, but that's just for the first step, right? No, that's for the entire process.
That's for the whole procedure. Yeah.
And then they scratch their heads and they don't understand what's going on, because it's such a shock that an attorney or legal service organization would be so affordable. But we do that, we're able to do that because we also receive grants from outside organizations, from the state, from private donors, that make it possible for us to not charge. And there are some processes that we don't charge for. We don't charge for naturalization, for citizenship right now. There have been periods where we haven't charged for deferred action, the program for childhood arrivals. So it's because we have funding coming in from other sources.
Coming back to the immigration reforms bill, do you see something happening before midterm election 2014?
Unfortunately, I don't. I think that we're talking about, it's a very brief time, 6 months approximately, and it's a really short time to overcome some really big obstacles. It's clear that the Republicans are not going to, they're not going to collaborate on this the way that we would like them to, and I think to have something set before midterm elections is just, it's not feasible.
So the way we are seeing things in media and whatever is happening, you think the final will be the administrative order by the president, or they will come up to a mutual thing? Because Republicans should know by now that now the immigrants from all over the world, they have their weight in the politics too.
I wish it were as simple as just an executive order. I would love to hand Obama a pen and say, just write this into an executive order. Unfortunately, to overhaul
the whole system,
the immigration law, it has to come.
And you think it's a huge, massive work?
It has to be. There's so much that has to change. There's so much that has to change. And it has to come, it can't come just from the Oval Office. It has to come collaboratively from the House and from the Senate. It has to be something, a bill that passes through the normal procedure to get to the President's office.
Now we have almost to the end of the show. I thank you again. Thank you very much, Elise, for taking time out. And we hope that this show will enlighten our audience. Thank you very much for the work you are doing. Keep up the good work.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much.
जी नाज़रीन, इसके साथ ही हम प्रोग्राम के इख्तिताम पे पहुंच चुके हैं और हम यकीन करते हैं कि ये प्रोग्राम आपको बहुत पसंद आएगा। मैं आखिर में सिर्फ इतना कहना चाहूँगा कि यूनाइटेड स्टेट्स ऑफ अमेरिका, नो मैटर, ये एक लैंड ऑफ अपॉर्चुनिटी है, मगर इस लैंड ऑफ अपॉर्चुनिटी में अपने ख्वाबों की ताबीर को ढूंढने के लिए जो रास्ता है वो सिर्फ मेहनत का है। तो ये हम खुद भी समझें, अपने बच्चों को भी बताएं, अपने बाकी कम्युनिटी के लोगों को भी बताएं कि शॉर्टकट्स मत ढूंढें, और अगर आपने अपनी सक्सेस को, अपने ड्रीम्स को अचीव करना है तो उसके लिए हार्ड वर्क इज़ दी ओनली वे। अपने गिरदोनवा का ख्याल रखिएगा और थैंक यू वेरी मच फॉर वॉचिंग द शो। खुदा हाफिज़।